Hello, good people of the internet. Following up from my last video on how Kickstarter is not a store for photography gear, and I do hope you watched that one, we'll be taking a look at byproducts such as the Xano drone and Yashica Y35 fill. If you don't want to watch my previous video, don't worry, I won't be referencing it. I'll be using new examples to back up what I'm talking about today, and if you want a TLDR to this one, hardware is hard. Let's get started. As I just said, I believe the main reason for failed photography Kickstarter projects is the fact that creators underestimate just how hard mass-producing hardware is, and most photography Kickstarters are either gadgets for your camera or bags. Things might not be quite as difficult as they once were, because 3D printers and backend as a service platforms such as AWS and Google Cloud do massively speed up the prototyping process. But it's not like you can expect to build a hardware business with the aim of selling to thousands in your shed and keep it there. Even those who make it past the first hurdle might go down within a few years. Take the Pebble smartwatch as an example. It was a smartwatch featuring an e-paper screen that predated both Wear OS and the Apple Watch. At the time, the Pebble was the most funded project on Kickstarter, and the company behind the campaign did many things right. As the popularity exploded, they started limiting pre-orders through Kickstarter to minimize disappointments and keep things within reach, and they used their new capital to hire the consulting firm Dragon Innovation to identify suppliers and manufacturers. When launching a mass-produced hardware product, and I mentioned this in the last video, you either need to know the right people or employ the right people. Without contacts to contract manufacturers, you will have no chance. Within a year of the Kickstarter ending, there were 15,000 Pebbles being produced every week. The product was delayed by 4 months, but I'd personally rather wait for something that works as intended than having something half-baked. Pebble Technology was doing many things right, and in their first year as a hardware company, they managed to ship 300,000 units. The good work continued for a few more years, and by the end of 2017 they had shipped 2 million units despite the introduction of Android and Apple smartwatches. During that time they also managed to crowdfund a successor. 2 successors actually, which again was a record-breaking campaign. The Pebble Time and Time Steel started shipping in May 2015 and was once again produced by the same contract manufacturer. But it was also in 2015 when things started turning sour for Pebble Technology. The smartwatch market hadn't grown as expected, and now there was also Apple and Google's Android Wear partners taking a large chunk out of that market. The Pebble brand just wasn't as established as Apple, Samsung, Motorola and the likes. And Pebble was still focusing on hardware by releasing multiple smartwatches and made no real attempts at actually marketing their brand. Newer smartwatches were also focusing more on health and fitness, whereas the Pebble was largely still a pure notification and time-telling device. Difficulties in Pebble's supply chain and the firing of a quarter of their employees meant that by 2016 the company was doomed. And eventually key assets were sold off to Fitbit, who was then sold to Google, and Pebble Technology stores shut for the last time. In the camera world, we'll also find some great examples of how hardware is underestimated. Take TriggerTrap, who built a successful line of camera triggers based on the Arduino. TriggerTrap wasn't just a hardware company, they also released the TriggerTrap mobile app all the way back in 2012, which could turn your smartphone into a camera trigger. The app cost $10 and you needed an adapter cable which cost another $10. That made TriggerTrap Mobile way cheaper than any other camera trigger. But today we're talking hardware, so we'll put the app to one side. The TriggerTrap V1, which was also a Kickstarter project, was relatively simple. I don't mean that in a demeaning way, but the fact that it used an existing platform, Arduino, and the PCB doesn't look all too complicated. The case was made out of acrylic, which can easily and quickly be cut with a laser cutter. In total, 950 people pre-ordered the TriggerTrap V1. With my limited knowledge of electronics, I'd say it wasn't all too difficult producing those units if you got someone to print and prepare the PCB for you. Also, the look of the TriggerTrap V1 probably appealed more to a certain nerdier crowd and wasn't of interest to those looking for a professional product. The exposed ports and translucent case do make it seem more like a DIY product rather than a finished professional product. TriggerTrap tried to change that by developing the TriggerTrap Ada, a completely custom-built and professional-looking product. The campaign received over £290k, which is almost 6 times the amount they asked for. The reason for this failure? Mainly the fact that hardware is hard. Haya Jankamp, who was the CEO of the now shut down TriggerTrap, wrote an interesting article on Medium about the company's failure and the 6 lessons he learned from it. Number 1, you have to fail fast. As soon as a hardware product moves in the wrong direction, you need to either pull the plug or take immediate action. Number 2, just because you've got more money than ever doesn't mean you have to forget about budgeting. Stick to the original plan and don't let things get out of hand. Number 3, any project, but especially hardware projects, need project management. Number 4, avoid so-called scope creep. Make the product you first set out to make and don't start changing the things during development. This happened to the TriggerTrap Ada when they decided to change the microprocessor. It basically changed everything about the product. Number 5, hardware needs people with hardware experience. As mentioned, the TriggerTrap V1 was a slightly more advanced hobbyist product. The TriggerTrap Ada was a custom design and the company had no one with any of the necessary experience to mass produce it. And finally, hardware is expensive. They brought in an experienced hardware project manager when it was already too late, and he basically told them that they wouldn't have gotten anywhere with only £290,000 in the first place. The LumaPod is another Kickstarter project that seems to have discovered how hard hardware actually is. Judging by the images they're posting in their updates, I do believe that this product will ship in one form or another at some point. But mass production is set to start in March, which is almost 2 years later than their original plan. And I can't imagine them having any budget left over for potential failures. They did raise €500,000, but just as the TriggerTrap CEO said, it might not be enough. How they pictured building the LumaPod with just the €35,000 they originally asked for, I do not know. Besides hardware being hard, there is another reason why Kickstarter projects fail. The product never existed and there was never a plan to bring them to life in the first place. The people behind these types of projects only want one thing: your money. You and I might call them scammers because that's what they are. This whole Kickstarter series started after I read an article detailing how the extra battery for Canon cameras was allegedly a scam. The frustrating thing about that project was that it looked so real. They had videos and detailed timelines and everything. But a bit of digging showed that there was something dodgy going on. Check out my previous Kickstarter video for a full rundown. Not always do you have to dig too deep though. The Insta ring, or pervert's ring as I call it, just doesn't seem feasible in the first place. Before I get started, please ask yourself if you would ever want to wear such a fat ring in the first place. How did this device appeal to almost 620 backers? Anyways, let's have a look at what makes the Insta ring unrealistic, shall we? First, for their quoted price of $89, you will not be getting a 4K capable 12 megapixel camera with optical image stabilization, autofocus, face detection and the alleged quality they show in their videos. That just ain't going to happen, not ever. While not as obvious, consider the fact that it is made from aluminium. At first it might sound fantastic and premium, but there are a few issues with that. Wireless charging won't work through aluminium. That's why recent phones switched back to glass or plastic backs. Also, there's no Bluetooth antenna to be seen. Have fun getting a signal through all of that metal. Finally, while I'm talking about Bluetooth, if it would work, which it doesn't, it would take almost a week to transfer 128 gigs of data, which is the ring's capacity, to your phone. Have fun with that. To sum things up, I'll repeat what I mentioned in the introduction once more. Hardware is hard, especially for those producing something for the very first time and setting out to do it their way. Unless you bring in experience, your project will most likely be underfunded and have an unrealistic time plan. Make sure you subscribe to my channel for advice on how to identify a legit and realistic Kickstarter project. and please consider leaving me a like if this video has taught you anything. With that said, it has been about enough from me for one day. I've been Liam Alexander Coleman, and this was me talking about why photography Kickstarter campaigns fail. You have not been Liam Alexander Coleman, but I will see you in the next one. Bye.